So to be able to enter the present moment is something that a skill, one could almost say, that grows in you, and it becomes easier and easier to step out of the conditioned entity. It doesn't matter for how long in everyday life, and sense the underlying presence, awareness, whatever you want to call it. But the thing is, that is not an object that you are aware of. Although when we use language, it sounds as if it were something that you become aware of. But the real you becoming aware of applies to everything else, because everything else is an object that arises in your field or space of consciousness. Sense perceptions, thoughts, emotions. They're all objects, they come and go. But the awareness itself is not an object that you are aware of because you are it. It becomes aware of itself. You become aware of yourself. And it's only an object-subject relationship when you speak about it. But when you actually realize it, it's not a subject-object because it's the arising of self-awareness. Now, this little talk here, the most important part of it is what I'm not saying, which is the gaps between the words. If you pay attention to the gaps between the words, you have to become aware and still. If you're not still or present, you cannot be aware of the gaps between the words. You would immediately fill the gaps between the words with your thoughts. Thoughts that, for example, are trying to figure out what the speaker has just said, or that take you somewhere completely different to tomorrow morning or tonight or yesterday or 10 years ago. Or the gaps between words become an uncomfortable place. And there's a feeling of frustration and why is he speaking so slowly? What's he really saying? I don't get it. I'm trying to get it, but I don't get it. Of course you don't get it because you can't get it by thinking about it. Now, this is helpful. So this little talk really is, the purpose of it is to become aware of that which is beyond language and beyond thought. And again, the moment you talk about it, becomes falsified to some extent, because I've already just said you become aware of it. Not really. It's the arising of awareness as yourself. And there you are now, a complete human being. And before you were just a human, unaware of being. I believe this Chinese sage Confucius, who is not easy to read because you have to look through a lot of cultural stuff. But he said somewhere that that humans are not fully human yet. We are on the way towards becoming fully human. And so one could say, yes, this is what it is, because you're not fully human until you are aware that you're a human being, not just human. It's not enough to be human. It's horrible to be just a human. It's suffering, frustration, fear, regret, and continuously stuff happening that make your life difficult as a human. There's no end to it. If it's not a personal problem or challenge, then it's a collective problem or challenge. And then personal and collective come together. There's no end to it. Until you become aware of the transcendent dimension. The mind stops for a moment, and you become aware of the space of awareness. And the tendency is for this to very easily become obscured again when you are engaged in everyday life. So your mission here is to integrate the dimension of being with your everyday life as a person, a human. No matter what you are engaged in your personal life, whatever it is, how old you are, no matter how old you are or what your station is in society, or that is your task, is this integration of the transcendent dimension and the conditioned dimension here. There are other words you could use. You could say integrate doing and being. The person is the doer. And even if you sit still and are not active outwardly, you're still continuously thinking as a person, so you're still doing the thinking. Well, you're not really doing the thinking happens to you, but it's a kind of... Most people don't think, they are the victim of their thoughts. But don't even know it. When that level is completely missing the transcendent dimension, you are at the mercy of whatever thoughts arise in your mind. And you confuse those thoughts with who you are. That's called normal. And you absorb thoughts from the collective mind, facilitated these days by our technology. And then certain thoughts become more predominant than others. They take over your mind. That can happen very easily. And then you derive your sense of identity from a bundle of conditioned thoughts that drown out all other thoughts, or most other thoughts. Some people have obsessive ideas about the world or about themselves or about other people. They're totally in the grip. These are more extreme manifestations of the same dysfunction that is in everybody who has not begun to awaken. So in the more extreme manifestation, which are not all that rare either, you are in the grip of very dysfunctional thoughts that act like a virus in your mind, a mental virus, affects all other thinking, all other thoughts. And then you look at reality through the veil of that, and you can't even see what's there anymore, because you could look at something it's white, but your thoughts say it's black, and you can't even see that it's white, or the other way around. This can also happen collectively, collective mind viruses. And there are periods of time in human history when certain areas on the planet get taken over by a virus infection, not the virus that we're talking about now, but a mental virus, not the physical virus, taken over by a mental virus, and then an entire collective being taken over by a mental virus. Sometimes in small areas on the planet for a certain period of time. It's like a disease, and then it subsides, and then you just have the normal identification with thought again, which is crazy, dysfunctional enough, but not quite as extreme as those periods when there is a viral infection of sometimes millions of people. I mean, everybody's familiar with witch burnings in the Middle Ages. Those when totally unbelievably insane. So how is it possible that almost everybody got infected by this? Then we have certain other, sometimes it could be a religious virus. In religious terms, it could be a political virus. We've had some big ones. They last a few years, usually, the infection. National Socialism, the communism, and the extreme power, we're familiar with that. Smaller areas of the planet, Cambodia, for example, under the regime of the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot. Not that many people perhaps are aware of that anymore. Not that long ago, the country killed 1/3 of its own population. Totally insane, taken over by a political virus, so-called political, that said that we need to kill all those who are the oppressors, which means everybody who can read and write, for example. They are obviously the oppressors of the peasants. And let's kill them and their children, of course. So you get very extreme forms periodically, but they all go back to the normal dysfunction. So sometimes the normal dysfunction, which is identification with thought, can become extreme. The only immunity you have against this virus, there is no vaccine, by the way, for the mental virus. You can't inject yourself with something that doesn't work. The only immunity is awareness. The only immunity is presence, so that when thoughts happen to you, there's the ability to be aware of the thoughts that happen to you, instead of being totally in the grip of the thoughts that happen to you. That's immunity from mental viruses. And I'm glad you're all here, because you have voluntarily come here for the spiritual vaccine against the mental virus. No anti-vaxxers here. It's particularly when a person is confronted with unusual difficulties, problems, adversity, challenges, then it can happen more easily that this person's level of consciousness decreases. You become more unconscious in the face of extreme challenges. So often extreme challenges make you more unconscious. And then that is when the mental virus can much more easily arise, because there's not enough consciousness left. In other words, when life gets difficult, whether it's on a personal level or on a collective level, when life is always difficult, but when it gets particularly difficult and hard, those times, whether it's in your personal life, things get difficult when you lose your job, you lose your livelihood, your career, breakdown of marriage, a relationship, death of a loved one, loss of possessions, loss of status in society, whatever it may be, some collapse in your personal life, something more extreme than the usual difficulties of life. Those are times when it's very easy to become reactive and lose consciousness, and then you are much more prone to be taken over by a mental virus. And that can also happen collectively. When a society is faced with extreme challenges, it is much more likely that a collective mental virus may arise. One example from politics in Germany in the 30s, there was a breakdown, a total economic breakdown. Everybody lost all their money. Inflation was rampant. To buy a loaf of bread, you needed a pile of money just to get 1 million marks to buy a loaf of bread. Everybody lost all their savings, everything, unemployment, everything, complete collapse on many levels. And fear arose, enormous fear in people. The moment the fear gets intensified, then you're really susceptible to that virus. And then very quickly, a collective viral infection, mental virus infection happened. And the virus infection, the mental virus, it lowers consciousness. it makes you, to put it bluntly and in very simple terms, obviously it makes you more stupid. So your level of intelligence goes down too, because you really have to be stupid to do those things that you do when you're infected. Your ability to think rationally diminishes. So without going into it, I can see some of it happening now, because collectively we are faced with the challenge of the physical virus. And there's a lot of fear rising. And the fear lowers your consciousness. And then you are really can very easily become infected by a collective mental virus, which means you can no longer think rationally about these things. And then whatever you do is wrong and makes things worse. So it's terribly important. What we've been talking about is the becoming aware of the transcendent dimension within yourself and become liberated from the person. The person continues to operate in this world until the person dies, but the person that continues to operate in this world is no longer as dysfunctional as a normal person. It still has its quirks and it has its idiosyncrasies. It still has perhaps certain likes and dislikes, and maybe a few weird things are still around, but it's no longer, the person is no longer really an agent of suffering, does not cause suffering to others, and does not make itself suffer anymore. So to some extent, the transcendent dimension begins to shine through the person. And that's wonderful. It's like the lamp and the lampshade. The person is a lampshade, and the awareness is the light, the lamp. And the lampshade gradually becomes more and more transparent to the light. It still has its shape and form, but it becomes more transparent to the light, and that is your destiny. That's why you're here. So giving attention and become aware of the field of attention that you're giving. And then you can practice even in a group sometimes. You may be able to practice while others are talking. You suddenly become aware of yourself as the awareness that's taking it all in. Make it into a spiritual practice, that an interaction with a friend or friends, make it into a spiritual practice. You don't have to tell them that, because they think you're weird if you tell them that. And don't neglect little things, very brief interactions with people. They're also quite important, and sometimes easier that way to practice that. It's wonderful when you can just look at a person, and for a moment, while that person is saying something, you are not saying anything inside you. There's only still alert presence. You begin to sense I'm reluctant to use a word that just came to mind, but I'll use it anyway. You begin to sense some degree of love towards that person when you look in that way. Maybe a better term is loving kindness, as a Buddhist term. Loving kindness. You can sense that. And so people become much more pleasant to interact with and to meet, because when you are present, you can sense the presence in the other, even if they are not present. You can sense that which is beyond the person or the personality. You can almost, one could say, you can pierce through the veil of the person or personality, and then you connect at a deeper level. And this connection at a deeper level is love, which as I say is the recognition of oneness. That's what love is. The recognition of oneness. So ultimately, you always love the other as yourself. That's the real meaning. Because you recognize ultimately the other is yourself. You're both manifestations of the one consciousness. The light is the same. The lampshades differ. There are many, many lampshades, but it's always the same light. Instead of reacting to the lampshade, you kind of look beyond the lampshade. You're aware of the lampshade, yes, but you look beyond it, and you're actually more aware of the light that's shining through than the lampshade. You're aware of both, but you're more aware of the light. And that's a wonderful thing that changes your interactions with humans, because until that happens, really, humans are so difficult. They're just so troublemakers, and they always, sometimes you think they're great, and then the next day they disappoint you and they let you down, and then they make your life difficult. So it's very important that is human interactions as spiritual practice, that is really extremely important. Human interaction as spiritual practice. Yeah, I wish you well in your spiritual practice with humans. So you bring the being into the human level. It would not be advisable to have a certain expectation that you need to arrive at a place where you are always at peace and whatever word you want to use it, always totally harmonious, always the same peaceful state. I can only talk from my own experience or realization and what I have observed in others who have gone through the awakening process or are going through the awakening process. It's inevitable that there will be certain fluctuations in your life. There may be fluctuations on the physical level. There may be times when you have less physical energy than at other times when you have more physical energy. Then there may be certain events in your life that happen that you could be on a beautiful vacation somewhere or in a beautiful natural setting and feeling very peaceful, or you could just have achieved something that is you had desired. You achieved professional success or whatever, and then you feel very happy. And And there may be other times when you lose something big, something is taken away, somebody dies close to you. These are external things. These fluctuations will affect you to some extent, but never at the core of who you are. So what remains in the background is that field of peace. So if somebody dies close to you, a parent or even a child dies, of course you feel sad. You weep, you cry. And the sadness will linger for some time and come in waves, come and go. And yet, what does not happen, despite the sadness, you do not become devastated. It does not devastate you to the core of your being. There remains in the background, a substratum, to use a term from geology, there remains a substratum of peace. Even there may be some turmoil on the surface, but you're never totally caught up in that. There's always that you can step back and you're aware of that background of peace. That's there. On the surface, you may weep and cry if you're standing at the grave of a loved one, and yet you are not devastated, as to use that term. There is still a peace in the background.